I expect that she will never teach again. I don't see any school district employing somebody who's convicted of something like this. That would be outright negligent of a school district to employ a known sexual offender.
A Tennessee teacher is accused of raping a child in her own home after using video games and social media to allegedly groom students.
We have a vulnerable population. We have a person in a trusted position. And so it becomes all that much more egregious when we see people who are teachers abusing children.
38-year-old Alissa McCommon was arrested on September 8th in Covington, Tennessee, about an hour northeast of Memphis. Weeks before, on August 24th, police received information from the Tennessee Department of Children's Services regarding allegations of sexual misconduct between the teacher and a former student. Since then, multiple students have come forward alleging sexual assault. They say McCommon started by playing video games with the children before switching communication to social media apps. After that, they say McCommon sent explicit photos before requesting sexual relations with the victims. Former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Florina Altshuler says this is a classic form of grooming.
They're not a stranger jumping out of the trees with a gun raping somebody. They're coaxing their victims into a level of trust and comfort. She was playing video games with these boys. She let them think that they're friends, that they can trust each other. And then once they're in a position of comfort and trust, then it usually starts with minimal inappropriate touching, and it progresses from there to a point where there's actual sex. Um, and this is really pretty common with both male and female perpetrators, this period of grooming young children, making them feel comfortable, making them trust, and then the criminal activity begins. And then sometimes there's either threats or coercion or something that instills fear in the victim to prevent them from reporting it.
McCommon taught 5th grade at Crestview Elementary School in Covington until this year, when she moved to Charter Academy to teach 4th grade English and language arts. When the police investigation began in late August, she was suspended from the district without pay. Altshuler says it's McCommon's role as a teacher that likely influenced the grooming process.
The reason it's so egregious when teachers do this is because teachers are in this unique position of power where they have constant, daily, 5 days a week access to their students. They are already in a position of trust with their students. They're in a position of power over their students. And when they have this continued access to their students, they're trusted to teach, nurture, and help mature these students, not to take advantage and sexually abuse them. But it is so much easier for a teacher to groom that student because of the nature of the relationship that they already have. You also see this with family members sometimes, and it's the same thing because the family member has frequent access to the child. And because they're in a position of power and control, they're in a supervisory role, they're in a position of trust. The child looks up to them, the child believes them. It really does not take long for them to turn that into kind of innocent, accidental touching sometimes to test the waters and see how the child will respond. And then once they know that they can trust the child to not report or complain, they keep taking it a step further and a step further.
Altshuler says child sexual abuse crimes committed by women are often underreported based on the culture surrounding male victims.
I think the female teachers don't get as much attention because it's heavily underreported. Our culture suggests that men should be happy that they're having sex. And we're talking about boys, not men here. But because this is a culture where the idea is that the male actor shouldn't cry victim, sometimes we forget that the male actor here is a child, and of course, by virtue of age, is a victim. But there's pressure on that child to not come forward. There's social norms about how boys are supposed to act. And so, really, I think it's not that females don't commit these crimes, it's that their male victims are underreporting those crimes.
In this case, police say McCommon sexually abused a boy aged 12 years old or younger in her home back in 2021. It was the victim's parents who brought forward these allegations.
Most of the time, the reason these cases come forward is because a parent finds out through either social media or text messages, or they intercept some sort of communication between teacher and student, and the parent says, wow, you are sexually abusing my child, and reports it to the authorities. It's not as frequent that boys will report this, unfortunately.
Right now, McCommon faces 1 count of rape of a child, but officials say she could soon face additional charges as the investigation continues.
So I would imagine that law enforcement would go through all of the text messages that the child is willing to provide. They would go through any email or social media contact that the two had. They would interview all of their friends. They would probably interview former students to see what, if any, contact that teacher had with those other students. Oftentimes, when we see sexual predators like this doing this, there's not one victim. There's a long line of victims. And the older the predator is, the more victims they have from the past. This teacher happens to be 38 years old. I imagine that she's been teaching for at least a decade, if not longer, and has more than just this one victim. So law enforcement will speak to former students, even current students, to see what kind of contact they've had with this teacher, and also to see if maybe they were witness to any inappropriate activity between this victim and this teacher. Young boys, young children, especially high school age, talk. They talk to their friends, they talk to their peers. Something is always said to somebody about something that happened. And so law enforcement will want to get those statements. And then, of course, they'll want to interview the victim and see what the victim is willing to share.
According to police, McCommon confessed to inappropriately communicating with the students. However, according to her attorney, she maintains her innocence.
When the police say we have a confession, sometimes they do. Sometimes the person literally said, yes, I had sex with this child. But sometimes when the police say they have a confession, what they mean is that she made many inconsistent statements, quasi-admissions, things that can be interpreted as a confession, but not necessarily a point blank, yes, this is exactly what I did. And even if she did give statements that implicate her, there's going to be a question of whether or not those statements were obtained appropriately, whether she was Mirandized, whether her rights were read to her, and whether she knowingly and willingly gave those up. If she didn't, then those statements cannot be used against her. And she does have an absolute right to plea not guilty and to take this to trial if she wants. So legally, even if she did it, she can still assert innocence. She can still say that she's not guilty. And it's up to the prosecution to prove that each of the elements of each of the crimes charged are met.
If the case does go to trial, Altshuler says a victim would need to testify.
I don't see any way that this can be proven without the victim testifying and saying exactly what happened and when it happened. That really is a crucial part of this. And if none of the victims are cooperative and nobody is willing to testify, usually there would be a very lenient plea deal that is offered, or the case could even get dismissed. So the cooperation of victims is essential in most any sexual assault case. It is difficult enough as it is to prove the charges with a cooperating victim. It's pretty much impossible to prove it without a victim. Whether or not it happened, when it happened, what exactly happened, how many times it happened, where it happened, those are details that usually only the victim and the perpetrator know. The perpetrator, unless they take a plea deal or give a full confession, usually is not giving all of those details up. And so it's up to the victim, if the perpetrator wants to take this to trial, to testify in front of a jury of complete strangers in uncomfortable and traumatic detail about what happened.
If convicted, it's likely McCommon would be placed on a sex offender registry. On top of that, Altshuler says she would lose her teaching license and could face time behind bars.
Most crimes that are sexual in nature do require registration on the sexual registry, or the registry of sexual offenders. But that being said, every state is different, and it's going to depend on the level of crime that she's convicted of. Some of the lowest level of crimes do not require registration. I expect, though, that a district attorney's office that has sufficient proof that this did happen is not going to allow a sexual predator to take a plea without the registry requirement. I expect that she will never teach again. I don't see any school district employing somebody who's convicted of something like this. That would be outright negligent of a school district to employ a known sexual offender. I expect that she will lose her teaching license in that state, but also that no other state would hire her if they know of her conviction, which should be disclosed. And depending on the level of crime, yes, you're looking at prison time. If it's a lower level misdemeanor that she pleads to, then she could potentially avoid prison time. If we're looking at a felony, you're talking about at least 1 year in prison, and it just goes up from there.
To prevent future crimes of a similar nature, Altshuler says it's important for parents to have an open line of communication with their children.
I would encourage parents to have open conversations with their children to learn about the relationships that their children are developing. If your child knows personal details about their teacher, you have to wonder, like, how do they know all those details? And what I mean by that is not, oh, she likes the color blue and eats pizza. But, how do they know what the inside of her house looks like? Or how do they know that she has a camper with fuzzy orange pillows inside of it? Or specific details about her life. Teachers really should not be sharing a whole lot of personal details in class. And I'm not saying that they can't share any personal details. Naturally, that does come up. But the more information that your child knows about their teacher's personal life, the more contact that they have with their teacher outside of school becomes a little bit questionable.
McCommon was arrested and booked into the Tipton County Jail. She's since been released on $25,000 bond. She's due back in court on October 13th. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Sierra Gillespie.